The first thing on the first page, I want to go through these. These things that are listed here can be potentially deadly, so they're important to know. Making up your own canning recipe, especially if you're doing soups or stews or something like that and want to can. Things like pumpkin and squash, you should always follow a recipe. If you mash it first and then can it, it will not, and you go by the time that's in the book, you'll not get the heat penetrate clear to the center because you're creating a solid mass in there. So you want to follow the directions. You cut it, you can heat it up so you can get a lot of times put my squash in the oven until just long enough for it so that I can prick the skin, and then I peel the skin off that way. I don't have to use, struggle to get it off. And then you cut it in 1-inch cubes and put it in and fill it full of water. Now, the water will not take away from it at all, and you can use the water in soups or stews or anything else if you want later on. So you want to not use anything that has not been tested. Don't just make up, your recipe. Yes?
Would adjusting the seasoning or the spices, would that be a new recipe?
No. Most of the seasoning and the spices are okay, unless you're using stuff like garlic. If you're using whole garlic in there because you want garlic in there, then you're adding a vegetable to it. But as long as it's garlic salt or garlic powder, that won't make any difference.
And what about like a family recipe that's been used for years and years?
Okay, if you like it, freeze it instead of canning it. And unless you can find a comparable recipe in a recommended book, then don't try to can it, because you don't know. Or if you want to can it, I should paraphrase this. If you want to can it, then you can it for the thing that takes the longest amount of time. So if you had a soup that you liked, and never, by the way, thicken soups or stews when you can them, because you're going to decrease the amount of heat that gets through. But if you, say for instance, you have a vegetable soup, but you all of a sudden decide that you'd like add some beef cubes or something to that, then it must be canned for the time it takes the meat to process, which is 75 to 90 minutes, depending on the size. And fish is always 100 minutes, unless you smoke it, then it's 110. So get something that you can follow the directions from. Okay, the next one, adding, we kind of talked about this, extra starch, flour, or other thickener to a recipe. You don't want to do that because it changes the heat penetration and you might be undercooking it. Adding extra onions, chili, bell peppers, or other vegetables to salsa. How many here like salsas? Almost everybody. How many of you have canned them before? Okay. WSU a year or so ago, well, it's been longer than that now, almost 10 years ago, went and published a salsa book. You can get it online, although I think you can get it. I'm just most of the things that we have, not all of them, but most of them, you can go online to WSU Publications, and you can get the recipes, or just for downloading them. It doesn't cost you anything, just download. For some reason, I might have taken it out. My cousin's up from Utah to visit, and we were talking stuff, and I might have taken it out.
I think it's salsa and the other one.
Yeah. But salsa anyway, it's not worth much anyway. But salsa, if you're doing salsas, you do have a little thing, well, it's in the water bath canning one, because the recipes that we have now are made so that you can water bath can them. If you follow them exactly, then you are safe to water bath can them. Otherwise, if you change them in any way, with a couple exceptions, and I'll mention those, but if you change them any other way, then here again, you have to do it for the thing that takes the longest amount of time. If you want to put peppers in there, most of the salsa recipes have more than one kind of pepper in them, not always. But if it calls for 2 cups of one and a cup of another, that's 3 cups total. You could put all 3 cups of bell peppers in there, or you could put 3 cups of jalapeno peppers in there, as long as you do not go over the specified amount for both combinations. And then, like the gentleman asked about the spices, you can change the spices and stuff in there. The one thing that I would caution you about is adding cilantro when you're canning, because it sometimes will give a bitter taste. You're better off to add the cilantro just before you serve it, or if you open it up in the morning, you're going to have it for dinner, put it in then and let it marinate in the salsa. Okay. A lot of people, I don't know how many times I've tried, people want me to answer this question. How long do I do something and I'm canning in the oven? Oven canning is not recommended under any conditions. So that's bad. It's going to be, it's going to go and be under processed, and air is not a good conductor of heat. You need something that's in a jar, in a vacuum, in order to can it properly. Sometimes people live up at high elevation. My cousin is from outside of Salt Lake. She lives at 4,800 feet elevation, and she has to adjust her recipes to suit that. Water boils quicker at that height. So you need to do that if you're, and I don't know about the concrete area or up here on some of the mountains with somebody, but you need to check. Anything over 1,000 feet needs to be checked. And then not venting the pressure cooker first. When you're using a pressure cooker, all of them have vents on, no matter what kind they are. The vent on this one is here. This is a dial gauge. This is a vent port. This is a weighted gauge, and this is a vent port. And they need to be vented after they come to a boil, and the steam starts coming out for 10 minutes. After the 10 minutes, then you put the weight on there, you put the weight on here. This one, the pressure will start to rise and the needle will move up. This one, you pressure can at 11 pounds pressure. And we'll talk about the reasons in just a few minutes. This one is 10 pounds pressure, and it has been adjusted to be the same as this in the making process. People were so used to having 5 or 10 or 15 pounds pressure. Something that calls for 5 pounds is one. I didn't bring both rings, but 2 is and they always should have a 3-ring gauge, weight gauge, if it's a canner. If it's a little pot pressure pan with a handle on, then they're solid like this one. And this one is here only to make sure it helps this maintain the pressure that you want. And it'll just kind of puff a little bit and let a little bit of steam out. And that. So, and this one is supposed to rock at a gentle pace. And it will, every time it rocks, it will let a little steam out. And that's the way it's supposed to be. So you're not hurting anything. Some of the other things is failure to acidify the tomatoes, which we talked about. Cooling your pressure canner under running water to get it down low, and that is not good. The canning time, the preserving time for this, goes from the time that you set that canner on the stove to do the venting and bring it up to temperature, the time that you took to can it, the cool down time, and then after, when it cools down, these all have a little deal on them. The new ones do. I don't know. Some of the old ones may not, but you still do the same thing. Right here, when this has pressure in it, this little thing is up. This locks here, locks underneath this. So this cannot be removed if this is up, because it's locked there and the pressure holds it there. So as long as this is up, there's still heat and temperature in the pressure inside this canner. So you wait until that drops down when all the pressure's on. And at that time, then that's when you take your weight off the top. Because when this goes down, then it's safe to take this off because there's no more air in there, the vacuum is gone.